Welcome back to the Goheen Cycles YouTube channel. This is episode 3 of the quarantine bobber build. At this point, this one took me a little while. Headlight bracket was not a big deal. You're gonna find out, basically I wanted to put an LED that got rid of the lollipop turn signals. And the big part of changing that out, I tried to put an LED in the factory bucket and it didn't work. So I bought like a universal bobber headlight bucket, which is single post. Made a bracket to make that work on the triple trees out of some aluminum. That process wasn't real difficult. It just taking some measurements and, you know, checking things over and over and over, drawing it up in CAD, throwing it in sheet cam, creating my cut files and cutting them on the CNC. The thing that really gave me fits, the electronics enclosure. I had an idea of what I wanted, but actually getting what I wanted was sort of difficult. But actually trying to transition what I was thinking into what I wanted was pretty difficult. I tried to source a piece of tubing the size I needed and the gauge I needed and couldn't find it. So I actually came up with the idea, why don't I just cut some metal up and then make the tube myself. You're gonna find out the first tube I made actually was too narrow, and I wanted it a little wider so that it came out to the edge of the frame rails. This episode gets all the way up through the point where that gets mounted. After that, I'm not figuring out, I'm trying to figure out how I want to do the doors, where there's something that slides down and there's a locking mechanism or hinge. But I'm thinking I want to be able to take and, like, you can get all your the electronics, so all your wiring and stuff can be down in there, but I'd like to have some space for, you know, if you want to put your wallet in there, or, you know, you want to keep your registration or your insurance card with you on the bike. This gives you the opportunity to do that, and it's still kind of hidden. So I want to play around with that idea. It's not anything huge, but it did take me a while to figure that out. So that's today's episode. Let's go ahead and get started on that headlight. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do this week, I was gonna start on electronics enclosure, but I decided I got a new headlight in. I'm not going to use the factory headlight. I actually ended up with one of these LED lights, and I had to buy a new housing for it. So the way this headlight setup works is these two over here are actually white normally when it's, you know, when it's in a regular run mode. But when you hit the turn signals, they actually turn amber and will flash with a turn signal on either side. So I had to end up buying a new bucket that has a single post on the bottom. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to remove this factory mount and then build a little piece that's going to basically stick up off here, and then the nut will stick right down in the middle. So that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get some measurements. I'll jump in Fusion 360, I'm gonna draw it all out, and then I'll jump over to the plasma table and cut the piece out. So you can see here, this is the factory light. It obviously has this bracket. There's 2 holes in the triple tree this mounts to, so what I'm gonna do is create a bracket that lines up with these 2 holes that single bolt will be able to mount to over here in my friend Fusion 360. All right, went in here in Fusion, I drew up what I was looking for in the headlight bracket. So basically this will mount to the triple tree, and then the new light will mount right up here. Took it over to sheet cam and created a plasma profile. Now I'm going to save this over to a USB and then take it over to the cutter and cut it. All right, I got this bracket cut, but I'm not liking this. I know you'll probably never see it, but you can see that the bracket I made is rounded. The bottom side of this post is actually squared at the top with a real small radius. So what I'm going to try to do is go in, edit the drawing, and add this radius, this squared off radius look to that piece, just to make it look a little more factory. All right, now you can see this is the squared part I was talking about. That matches, these match the radius of that bracket. So I'm going to export this over to sheet cam, and then we're going to go over and cut it. So here you can see a huge difference. That was the first one. You can see it's rounded up here at the top. The new one is squared off to match the squared front on the headlight. So let me get it mounted up. All right, that made a world of difference. You can see here now, these two line up perfectly, which I know it looks kind of funky right now because this is just raw aluminum, but this will all be powder coated when I powder coat the whole front end, so it'll blend in really well. And I just wanted them to match up. I didn't want, you know, a round bracket with a square base on this old style headlight. So there we go. All right, headlight's all done. Now you can see that it was mounted. I think it turned out really well. I need to move a couple wires around, but other than that, powder coat it whatever color I'm gonna do the whole triple tree, and then it's ready to go. So on the electronics enclosure, I basically took some sheet metal and rolled it. The first time I didn't cut the slit out of it. Then I realized I could actually cut the metal and go ahead and cut the circle out of it that I wanted for the wires to run down through. And then I'm just gonna put like a piece of like rubber around the inside of that so the wires don't wear through it. But most of it was all cut on my CNC. I did keep the patterns. I'm actually contemplating selling 2 of these products, throwing them on my website and see how they work. The Headlight adapter, as well as a weld together kit for this. Everything would be cut. Most people have welders in their garage, and you would be able to weld this stuff together yourself. You just don't have the tools to necessarily CNC cut to make sure everything is perfect every single time, get a perfect radius around everything, to get the shape of the circle in the electronics enclosure. That would come to you unwelded, and then you would just have to hold it together, put some clamps on it, weld it. It's just something I'm kicking around. We'll see what happens. All right, now it's time to work on the electronics enclosure that's going to go underneath the seat. Some of this stuff may look very strange. I've actually been working for a few days to try to tweak some of these measurements. But basically, these are all of the flat pieces I'm going to need, I believe, to be able to create this enclosure. So I had, just to test it, I had made this yesterday, a 5-inch round tube. The problem is it's not long enough. I want it a little longer, so it's a little wider as it's sitting in the bike. But these are the pieces that I'm going to need to create that. So at this point, I'm going to start rolling this out and then get it tacked together like this one is for a 5-inch tube, and then we'll start fitting all the rest of this stuff up, and you'll see how it kind of comes together. Alright, so got it held down with some clamps over here on the inside. You can see just checking, and it looks like we're right on the money there. And I grabbed one of my 5-inch discs just a second ago, you can't see it, to cover the end caps, and that looks good. So I think at this point I'm going to grab the MIG welder. I'm going to put a couple tacks on this here and here, and get the long welding clamp and put one here in the middle just to kind of hold the whole thing together. And then I'll figure out the side pieces, probably like somewhere in there. And then I'll have to figure that out. I'll have to set it up on the bike and see. And then obviously this is the hole where all the wiring is going to come down into it. So here we go, we're getting closer. This was way too much back and forth, so I actually ended up not filming most of this, like trying to mock this up. But basically what I did was I mounted these 2 brackets, the 2 top brackets here, on the frame, figured out where I wanted the tube to be, and then set them up and kind of like taped everything in place just so I could keep my measurements the same. I also wanted, you can see there, that hole that goes through, those are actually dimple dyed, just to give it a little strength and a little style, because there are some holes in the frame right next to this. So I figured, if nothing else, it just gives it a little flair. Obviously, you can see here, that was the flat slot that was in that original piece of sheet metal. So now it's covered by these brackets, so you don't see it, and then all the electrical wires can run down in there. And then I cut another little bracket down here that goes into that bracket right in the middle of the frame. So basically we'll create, this piece will be 100% bolt on. There's the other tube I made, which I kind of screwed up on. So there it is. Now I'm going to sit here, I'm going to weld all this together, then I'll mount it on the bike so you guys can see it. I want to give you guys a quick 360 of the headlight. And what will happen is these will be white. These two things here will be white till you hit your turn signals, and then they'll turn on with your turn signals, which completely eliminates the lollipops. And then down here we have the electronics enclosure. You can see here, let me move this out of the way. The slot down in there for you to put your wiring. Right now I just have a magnet holding the cap on. You can see we're seam welded together, and that's where the wiring's going to come down. So I just have this strong hand tools welding clamp on there for now, holding it in place, but you kind of get an idea. And then fender's just sitting up on here, but this is the enclosure from the other side. You can see I don't have the cap, it's sitting here. I'm not actually sure I'm going to use these yet, but we'll see. But you can see there's a lot of room down in there. So there it is. That wraps it up for episode number 3 on the quarantine bobber build. Thanks for sticking around on the channel. If you have any questions, put them in the comments box below. If you didn't catch the first 2 episodes, actually it's 2.5 episodes, jump back on the playlist and check those out as well. You can check us out on our website, goheencycles.com, our Facebook or Instagram pages, which the links are in the description. Thanks again for stopping by. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next week.